The brackets have been released. We have a tournament field. The tournament is just days away. Welcome all into the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We are going to talk about what Gonzaga and St. Mary's are going to have in this tournament, the seedings that they have received. We'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the matchups I'm looking forward to. Obviously, we all fill out brackets. We all fill out the whole thing. It's not just focusing on one conference or another. So talk a little bit about some of the ones I'm looking forward to seeing in these first couple days of the tournament. Also talk a little bit about maybe the bracket habits that we all have of how many we all go through, how many we fill out, and all that sort of stuff. We'll talk a little bit about some portal rumors, as well as there is at least one big name that has been linked to a WCC team. And then also the postseason is not just Gonzaga St. Mary's. Both San Francisco and Santa Clara were added to the NIT field. Oregon State was left out, but we'll talk about those two and what their matchups are going to look like as they continue their seasons on in the NIT. So let's start off with St. Mary's and Gonzaga. And the Gales did pull a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. They will be starting on Friday as they will play 10 seed Vanderbilt. We'll get into the details of that. And then Gonzaga is an 8 seed to start this tournament. Wildly underseeded in my estimations. A lot of the brackets had them still at 6, maybe a 7, and 8 just sounds really ridiculous when you think about some of the predictive metrics, all of the metrics really that have Gonzaga as a top 10 team. We know that the results have kind of are not great, but an 8 seed is what they do have. They start on Thursday, and they will kick it off with Georgia in that first round game, Bulldogs versus Bulldogs. So the two WCC teams, their first round matchups will be against the SEC, which had a record 14 teams get into the NCAA tournament. 14 of their 16 teams were selected to dance this year. And we'll take a look a little bit about St. Mary's. And for both of these teams, we're going to go more in depth with both of these squads later on in the week as we start to preview the specific matchups that we're going to see for Gonzaga and then also for St. Mary's. But just a brief overview of what we will see from these two squads. Obviously, St. Mary's is coming off the WCC championship loss to Gonzaga on Tuesday night, and they will play Vanderbilt, who they haven't seen in a couple of years. They've played them 2 seasons ago, but a different regime, different team. So this game will be on Friday at 12:15 Pacific time in Cleveland. They are going to be sitting across from the 2:15 game, which is Alabama and Robert Morris. Reminder, last year, St. Mary's was sitting across from Alabama in Spokane when they ended up losing to Grand Canyon. That could have been a second-round matchup for St. Mary's a year ago, and they'll have another opportunity for Alabama to be that opponent again this year. So the quick rundown of Vanderbilt. This is a 20-win Vanderbilt team. They were 8-10 in the SEC. They were the 12 seed for the SEC tournament. They are coming off a first-round exit in that SEC tournament via Texas. But this is a KenPom 49 team, offensive rating of 30. Team that takes care of the basketball pretty well, a little over 10 turnovers per game. They don't shoot it particularly well from 3, only 32.5% from the field. But this is a team that does force fair number of turnovers. They do average 9 steals a game. But defending the 3 isn't the best on the squad either. 36.9% is their opponent 3-point percentage. And just a couple of guys to look at. Again, we're going to go more in depth, but Devin McLaughlin, 10 points, 7.9 rebounds. Jason Edwards, 17 points in 23 starts. He's played all 32 games for them at this stage. But this is also not a very big team. Their biggest guy on the roster is 6'9". Obviously, we know the St. Mary's squad carries a few different guys who are going to be 6'10 and taller. So this could very well be a mixing and matching of styles between these two. But on first glance of what this game, and then also potentially looking forward to a matchup with Alabama, on a toughness scale, if I'm looking at this, I'm like, this feels like a very gettable game, and obviously we'll go into that a little bit more in depth, but this feels like, if I'm rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of how tough this first one is for St. Mary's, it feels like a 6, maybe a 7, somewhere in there. Not the toughest, but certainly not an easy matchup either. No matchup in the NCAA tournament is easy. This one feels a little bit more a mismatch that favors St. Mary's because of the way they play defense and because of their size and everything else. So that's why I lean a little bit more on the 6 side for that first game. That second game, if they potentially see Alabama, this is like an 8.5 or a 9. The style of play that they have is going to be a lot more up-tempo. This is a team that's going to want to score. Of course, St. Mary's is used to seeing a team that tries to run up the score and wants to play up-tempo in Gonzaga, but they do it in very different ways. So Mark Sears, obviously the point guard for Alabama, is a big component to what they're going to do. So we'll get into all of that further on down the week. And these two, St. Mary's does not play until Friday, so we will get back to this matchup later on. Now, if we're looking over to Gonzaga, 8 seed, Midwest region, and they are starting off with Georgia. They will be the Thursday game, 1:35 Pacific time start from Wichita, and they will sit across the 1:16 matchup, which is the 1 seed Houston against 16 SIU Edwardsville, who are making their first tournament appearance ever. And yes, 8 seems wildly underseeded for Gonzaga. All the predictive metrics, all the resume metrics, every metric says Gonzaga should be higher than they are. It probably says that they should be at least a 7, if not higher. I mean, and of course, the same can be said for St. Mary's, who should probably be higher than a 7. But they are where they are right now. And it doesn't at this stage matter where you were seated, underseeded, or whatnot. It's a matter of who is now in front of you. And right now, that is Georgia. And for this Georgia squad, this is also another kind of similar to what we talked about with Vanderbilt. This another SEC team. This one also, they finished 8-10 in the SEC, and this team also was a little bit finished tied for 9th in the SEC. They were 11th seed in the conference tournament, and their season ended with a loss to Oklahoma, who was one of those bubbled teams. Also, and did pick up a win against Vandy actually 2 games ago. So you look at even just like similar matchups. This Georgia team did have the slight advantage against Vandy, hence they're to the 9, and Vanderbilt is a 10. But this Georgia team has actually been playing really well of late. They have won 4 of their last 5, including beating the 1 seed Florida just a couple weeks ago. So this is a very capable, very talented Georgia team, and this was not going to be a pushover for Gonzaga. This honestly might be the toughest draw Gonzaga has had in quite a long time, especially for the first 2 games. You think about even what Gonzaga had to deal with a year ago with McNeese. That is a McNeese team that was not experienced in the NCAA tournament, didn't necessarily know what they were getting themselves into, and hadn't had that tough of a non-conference schedule or a conference schedule, even though they were very talented. That was a total mismatch. This one doesn't feel like it's going to be nearly that sort of mismatch, and obviously it won't, because this is an 8 and a 9. Even if Gonzaga might be an underseeded team. Asa Newell being their leading scorer, 15 points per game, 54% from the field. And this is also a team that doesn't necessarily shoot the three all that well either, even though they do have a couple of guys who are going to shoot it fairly well. Silas Demery Jr. is going to be one of those. Blue Kane, another. So this Georgia squad is going to make it interesting in this matchup with Gonzaga. But I still feel like this Gonzaga squad is just so practiced and experienced in the NCAA tournament that at least for game one, that is going to shine through, and that is going to be able to carry them through one game. Again, looking at the matchup, like this feels like a 6 or a 7 for this first matchup for the Zags. Graham Ike has been here before, played well last year in the tournament. Ryan Nembhard has been here before, played well in the tournament. It is going to be a first time for Michael Ajayi. It is going to be another experience at this level for a Caliph Battle. So there are some guys that the Gonzags are going to need to step up on this stage. Nolan Hickman has been here before, and he has performed in moments in the NCAA tournament. So there's a lot of experience to mix in with the Ajayis and the Battles, who are going to be doing this really for one of the first times in their careers. But I do think that they are going to be able to get through that first one. It's that second matchup that I do believe that the run to the Sweet 16 ends. Even though I will say, looking at the 4-1 seeds, Florida, Auburn, Duke, and Houston, I do feel that this one, even though it is a clash of styles, Houston-Gonzaga, these two, at the very least, it is a style to an extent that Gonzaga is used to seeing because they play St. Mary's 3 times a year. That they are used to slowing it down, being this drag-it-out physical matchup with obviously a top 25 team. It's not unusual for Gonzaga to have to play this way, even if they have at times struggled in that way. Obviously lost 2 out of 3 to St. Mary's. They lost the game to UCLA, who also played not quite to that scale, but similar in that kind of rock fight, slow it down, drag it out sort of style. Feel that second game for Gonzaga against this squad, and really, honestly, I don't think it would have mattered which 1 seed it was. This is a 9, this is a 10 in difficulty for the Zags. This is maybe the 1 seed who has the more holes than the others. The others are far more balanced. It feels like this Houston team is the one that could go on stretches of scoring droughts. This is the one that might be prone to be able to be a little bit worse on offense than those other 3 1 seeds. And Gonzaga has shown over the last couple months that they can play some defense. So they held St. Mary's to 51 the other night. So the Zags are capable of playing that level of defense. But looking at this individually, thinking about that matchup, this does feel one-sided. It does feel one-sided. It does feel like, honestly, against any of the 1 seeds, Gonzaga was going to struggle. That's why there was such emphasis and importance on trying to get off that 8-9 line. Because even though this would be a matchup of 2 top 10 KenPom teams, Gonzaga has yet to really show that they can do it on a consistent basis against very good teams over the course of the season. So I do think that if that matchup were to happen, Houston, Gonzaga, that the Zags would find that Sweet 16 streak end at 9 straight years, which we can talk about that, about how impressive that is later on, because a streak like that to end is something to be celebrated in and of itself. Now, taking a look at the rest of the bracket. Obviously, I'm sure all of you have already started to look at it on your phones, pull it up, have it on your screen, what all the better matchups are going to be, how you're going to fill out your own bracket, and all of that. I've already watched like 4 or 5 different bracket preview shows in different segments and just seeing what everyone else is looking at. and how much does that match up with what I'm looking at as well? So the one region I'm loving right now is there's 3 matchups in the South that really are kind of jumping out at me. Now, there's a lot of great matchups. I don't want to say that the matchups I don't say are not going to be good, but the ones that really stand out to me as just ones that are going to be fun watches in this first round. That 8-9 Louisville Creighton game is just going to be so much fun. Louisville probably underseeded, but that program having been completely reinvigorated this year with this Creighton team that has also played some really good basketball over the course of this season. Seeing these two face off is going to be a ton of fun. It does stink that one of them will have to end up playing Auburn in that second game, but taking this as an 8-9 game alone, a lot of years we don't get very good 8-9 games. A lot of times we get these kind of ho-hum, we get one mid-major and one power conference school playing each other, and it usually doesn't yield very good results. But this one feels different because you have a Louisville team, while coming from a power conference, it has rejuvenated itself and is in that rebuild mode. The fact that they're here and back in the tournament is they're looking to prove themselves even more. And for Creighton, who is a tournament regular, this is another opportunity for them to pad the resume of how well that they have played in tournaments over the course of the past decade plus. Both of these squads have something to prove. This feels like it's going to be one of the best games of the entire first round. I'm really excited for that 8-9 matchup with Louisville Creighton. The next one I have on my list is that 5-12 Michigan and UC San Diego. And it's more for the fact that obviously UC San Diego is going to be the trendiest of trendy picks when it comes to the first round. And there's a lot of reasons why. The Tritons are a 30-win team. They won the Big West tournament. They arguably could have had the resume to get into the tournament anyway. And the fact that it's their first year eligible for the NCAA tournament, the fact that they made it, and it was a resounding yes, they belong, says so much about what that program has been able to do. And to get a Michigan team that is coming in, obviously, like Michigan has had a good season as well, but going up to elevation, traveling to the West Coast, they're going to be playing this one in Denver. San Diego, that's a quick trip from San Diego up to the Rocky Mountains. Michigan would have to travel a little bit further. Is this a little bit of a perfect storm for UCSD? It might be. And obviously it's going to be a trendy pick. I don't necessarily know if they're going to pull it off, but this is one that's going to be just a lot of fun to see that school, that program get to experience it for the first time. And there are a lot of first timers in this tournament, which is a lot of fun to see. And I think for many of us who have gotten used to being in the NCAA tournament, those of us who are fans of teams who make it a regular occurrence to be in the dance, we can sometimes forget how special getting there is, because it is hard, it is difficult. And for schools that come from smaller conferences or don't have the basketball rich tradition or are still trying to find their way, getting there is still a big deal. And for UC San Diego, 5 years into their D1 tenure, and they've been good the entire time. Let's not mistake that. Like, UC San Diego's been good since day one in Division I. And they've continued to build, and this appearance is the culmination of all of those years that they have put in to be able to get to this point. And obviously they've done an amazing job, and UC San Diego feels like a team that will hear starting this year on a regular basis on Selection Sunday. So this one is just going to be fun because of that first time feeling and the fact that they're good and absolutely could take out Michigan in this first round matchup. Now, the next one I have on my list, still in the South, is the 7-10 Marquette and New Mexico. And this almost for no reason other than I want to see Donovan Dent just run wreck shop on the NCAA tournament. St. Mary's and a number of WCC teams have seen him over the last few years, and we know how talented and how dangerous he can be. And he's going to get his shot as the guy for this New Mexico team this season to show it to the rest of the basketball world. And seeing him on that stage, I think, is what I'm most looking forward to. And against a Marquette team that has had some big wins of their own, has had some real battles with St. John's and UConn and Creighton this year. Like Big East, obviously at the top is still one of the better conferences in the country. Marquette is right there in the mix with all of them. So this matchup, Marquette, New Mexico, is going to be a lot of fun to see. This one later on in the week. Still working on where all these matchups are. Let's see. Hold on. Let me pull that one up. Let's see. That one is going to be played on. That one's in Cleveland, so that one is going to be on Friday. So that won't be in the same location as St. Mary's and Vanderbilt. At what was Quicken Loans, it's now Rocket Arena in Cleveland. Okay, so next, thinking about one more, and it's not really one, it's really the pod, because this pod has the recipe for not one, but two upsets. And it's in the Midwest region. Looking at the 5-12 and 4-13 games there, I'm staring at Clemson and McNeese and Purdue and High Point. McNeese, again, mentioned them earlier, in the tournament a year ago against Gonzaga. It did not work out well for them. But now they're back in the tournament with a little bit more experience, with remembering how that experience went, and probably against a team they're a little bit more suited to play in Clemson. That was a little bit more of a mismatch last year against such an experienced team and against a Gonzaga squad who really were playing well at that stage. Clemson has been a little up and down as we've gotten closer to the end of the season, so this might be the actual right moment for McNeese to strike. And on the other side, I keep looking at Purdue, and while they have continued to be good in the Big Ten, I don't know, like this is not Zach Edey's Purdue team, and they can be beaten. And High Point has played with such great energy. There's on such a roll right now that is a squad that could absolutely be a Cinderella this year. It could be a High Point. It could be a McNeese. And the fact that both of them are in the same pod with each other, I think makes it all that much more exciting. That, as we know, if these teams continue to stay in it late in contests, the buildings start pulling for the underdog. And that, I could very easily see that happening with these two in that matchup, in that game in the Midwest region. And those two games taking place, that is going to be on Thursday. Oh, that's right around lunchtime out west, and both those games are in Providence at Amica Mutual Pavilion. So just two more games that I just feel like I'm going to definitely be keying in on once we get to the actual games later on this week. And then just looking at the toughest region in general, and of course, this is where you'll hear almost every single analyst, every single person talk about which region is the toughest. And I agree with them all. It is clearly the West region. Florida, as the 1 seed in this one, they really did draw the short stick on this one. They're in a region with UConn, Memphis, Maryland, Drake, Texas Tech, Arkansas, St. John's. This is a region where it very well could be 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different teams who could legitimately come out of the region, only because there is so much higher potential for upsets with this group. Again, I only mentioned some of the teams. Like, I didn't even mention that there are some of the others that actually absolutely could pull some upsets in there as well. I obviously mentioned UConn, who are the defending champs, but that's also a team that's played Oklahoma, and even though Oklahoma, I could make the case, shouldn't be in at all, here they are. Colorado State won the Mountain West tournament. They're playing Memphis. They could absolutely go on a run. Grand Canyon is in here, and they've started to play a little bit better as of late. Missouri is in here. You also still have Kansas as well in this grouping. There's a lot of talent in this West regional, and Florida being the head of it doesn't necessarily mean that Florida, even though you can very well make the case that Florida might be the favorite or one of the 2 favorites going into the whole thing, they're gonna get tested more than maybe any other number 1 seed that is sitting in the tournament right now. And this is why when I think about going through making my own bracket, how many times am I going through this practice of picking different matchups, looking at these specifics, throwing a dart at the wall, trying to figure out who's going to win all these games. And I think I probably go through 3 or 4 different practices of fill it out, do it again, just to see how I feel about each of the games. And usually by that 3rd or 4th time, I feel like I've gotten it down of like, this is what I think is actually going to happen. Or do I see a little too many upsets? Is it a little bit too chalky? Is the chalkiness the way it should go? Sometimes, obviously, there are years where it should, others not so much. This year does feel like there's maybe a few more upset potentials early on, but that doesn't mean that we're going to see a lot of the 1s and 2s fall early on. I think there's still a very good chance we're going to see the 1s and 2s get deeper into the tournament. But this first round, I think we could see a lot more chaos from these first couple days of the tournament. So as you're filling out your brackets, as you're kind of going through it, obviously most of us have until Wednesday night, first thing Thursday morning to continue to work on it. I'm probably going to do it 3 or 4 times before I really figure it out, and maybe even have different brackets if I'm working with having pools with different groups, work, friends, whatnot. There might be some variation there. But this is one of the fun parts of the entire experience, is that everyone can get involved. And usually the people who don't know the most do well. And that's also a lot of the fun, and I'm sure that all of us have experienced it, even though we're the ones who watch college basketball all the time. It's the coworker, it's the friend who knows absolutely nothing about it that will end up somehow doing the best. But speaking of brackets, the NCAA is obviously not the only tournament that's happening. The NIT was also announced on Sunday night, and its bracket. 2 WCC teams are involved in that tournament as well, San Francisco and Santa Clara. And for both teams, they received a higher seed. USF received a 1 seed, so they will be leading the San Francisco region of the NIT. They will be kicking it off with Utah Valley, who are the WAC regular season champions. That game is on Wednesday at 8 on ESPNU, and the winner of that will play San Jose State or Loyola. And so for USF, that could be a rematch with Loyola, who they played back in December. Now, we'll go a little bit more in depth on this matchup, not a ton, but still kind of go into this one because we won't really preview. This will be the preview for the NIT matchups in the first round. So for USF and Utah Valley, Utah Valley had a really good year in the WAC. They were 15-1. They were the regular season champions, 25-8 overall. They lost in the WAC championship game to Grand Canyon, 89-82. But this isn't a team that overall, while the record looks great, they really didn't beat all that many good teams. Like this was a Ken Palm team 114, but it's a pretty balanced squad. 7 players who average 15 plus minutes per game. They're a good rebounding team, 5 point plus 5 in rebounding margin for the season. A few guys to watch: Dominic Nelson, 6'5" guard, 14 points per game, 5 rebounds, very good rebounder for his size, and also is 12th in the NCAA in free throw attempts on the season with 232. Carter Welling, 6'10", best rebounder on their team, 6.1 rebounds. Also is a fairly good 3-point shooter at 33%. So that's actually going to be an interesting matchup for Carlton Lingard, as that might be just almost staring into a mirror as far as style of play and what those two are going to bring. Tanner Toulson, if the last name sounds familiar, that is because his brother played for BYU just a few years ago. So 13.3 points per game, 35% from 3. Another person from Utah Valley that you're going to have to keep an eye on. This Utah Valley team played really well in the first, I would say, 10 minutes of the game against Grand Canyon, which their championship tournament, also at the Orleans Arena. So while the metrics say that this should be an absolute win for USF, we know that USF is also dealing with a shortened roster of their own. Ryan Beasley is going to have to continue to step up and play a larger role for the squad. And we saw him be able to do that against Washington State in the quarterfinals of the WCC tournament. We saw a little bit at the beginning of the game against Gonzaga, but the Zags defense was able to take him away late in that game, so he was less of a factor. But Malik Thomas is playing what will be one of his last college basketball games. You have a few guys on this team who are going to be playing their last college games in the NIT. So there's going to be a lot of emotion, obviously, for Utah Valley as well. But this San Francisco team gets to play another game at War Memorial Gym. One more opportunity to play in front of the home crowd. And even though the NIT is set up a little bit differently, they're not quote unquote home games, but this is still an opportunity to play on the hilltop one more time in a tournament that honestly, like, they're probably well set up to do some damage in this tournament. The NIT bracket does, I think, favor USF fairly well as it gets deeper into its area. So again, they play Utah Valley first. They will get the winner of San Jose State Loyola. And then the other side of that bracket is St. Bonaventure, Kent State, Stanford, and CSUN. So you do have some more opportunities in this tournament to advance. And I do think USF would do very well in their regional. Now Santa Clara, they are the 2 seed in the Irvine region. So as you would expect, that means, yes, UC Irvine is the 1 seed for that region. But they will tip it off with UC Riverside Tuesday at 8, also on ESPNU, and the winner of that will play the winner of St. Joe's and UAB. Now Riverside, overall 21-12, 14-6 in the Big West. They lost in the second round of their tournament to Cal Poly. Now, if you remember way back in November, Riverside and Santa Clara played each other. They played back on November 19th, which actually was probably about a moment where Santa Clara might have been playing their best basketball. And, well, Riverside might have played their worst basketball. Santa Clara won that game 96-54. And before you jump off and say, like, well, then Riverside probably wasn't all that good or whatever else. Well, one, they're here in the NIT for a reason. Two, they had games prior to that. At BYU, they lost by 6. At Oregon State, lost by 15. This matchup against Santa Clara was just the perfect storm of everything going wrong for the Highlanders. They shot 29% from the field. They were 4 for 31 from 3. Santa Clara, on the flip side, they shot 58% from the field. They were 12 for 22 from 3. Very familiar sounding stat line for them. But maybe the unusual one was the rebounding margin. 45 to 28 was the advantage that Santa Clara had on UC Riverside. So that is definitely a number where that felt way more lopsided than we have normally seen from the Broncos. So going into that one, this really does feel like for the Broncos, it is clearing the glass and limiting second chance points, because Riverside is one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the country. And that shows that, like, that number that I mentioned earlier about the rebounding in that specific game was an outlier. UC Riverside does typically do a much better job on the rebounding front. They had an awful night against Santa Clara at the Levy Center. And even though this game will be at the Levy Center again, I'd imagine that Riverside's going to put up a much better fight round 2 against Santa Clara, albeit I do think that this still sets up well for Santa Clara, assuming they can play the game that we're used to seeing them play and not the game that we saw them play against Pepperdine just a week and a half ago. Now, overall, this NIT bracket actually is, again, I mentioned for USF, it feels like it's pretty well balanced and they could do some damage. I think the same is true for Santa Clara. They should beat Riverside. I don't think there's much of a conversation about that. Then they have St. Joe's or UAB. Both were going to be tough, but Santa Clara as the 2 would be hosting, so that clearly puts the advantage in their court. Now, if they were to get down to the quarterfinals of the NIT and they play UC Irvine, this is where it gets a little funky, because this Irvine team obviously has played very well all season long. There's probably still a little bit of the chip on their shoulder that they could not finish the deal in the Big West tournament and beat UC San Diego. So this is their way to make amends and come away with something after the great season that they have had. Irvine would end up hosting that. Let me look at this. Actually, yeah, they would still end up hosting that game later on in March. So this is still, Santa Clara, I think, has a path to get to Hinkle Fieldhouse, which is where the NIT semifinals and championship will be held. But I think their path is a little bit tougher than obviously what USF's is going to be. And for both of them, thinking of what the other top teams in the rest of the NIT are, you have the likes of Dayton, Bradley, George Mason, North Texas, Arkansas State, SMU. All are in this tournament. All are very good teams. That's why, honestly, I looked at the whole bracket, and the NIT field is going to be wildly entertaining. You have a lot of very good mid-majors who are all in this tournament. So this is going to be a lot of fun just to kind of see which of these squads is going to be able to move on, and really who's going to kind of put their stamp of, we should have been in the tournament too, and get to Hinkle Fieldhouse and kind of prove that to everyone watching this. And yes, I just even looking at it, this is going to be more fun than that college basketball crown tournament. This one is good teams with a lot of players who are probably going to stick around to finish it out. I don't think there are going to be too many guys who are on these squads who are going to hit the portal right away. And then speaking of the portal, I did mention that there was at least one rumor out there that was reported on by Joe Tipton. Iowa's Owen Freeman did hit the portal just the other day after Fran McCaffrey and Iowa decided to part ways. And there are 4 teams in hot pursuit or are going to be in definitely high conversation with Freeman to bring his services to their schools. Creighton, Michigan, Arkansas, and then Gonzaga. Those are the 4 names that have been already put out there. So interesting note to kind of keep an eye on as the portal starts to heat up. We have seen, obviously, Gonzaga take full advantage of the portal in the past. They will need someone like an Owen Freeman to start to fill some of the gaps they will have going into next year. So those unfamiliar, over at Iowa, he was averaging 16 points this season, 6 rebounds, shooting 63% from the field, 6'10" sophomore. Really good. Got to see him a little bit when they played Washington State earlier on in the year, and he is a monster. Missed the last back half of the season due to surgery on his finger, so that is something that, or an injury on his finger, and that is something that probably will not impact what he's going to look like going into next season. So just to keep an eye on the portal. So we have at least a name that is of interest in the WCC. We know of Mo Odom, who has already hit the portal last week with Pepperdine. So things to keep an eye on. But really the focus this week is obviously postseason basketball, the NCAA tournament, the 2 NIT teams, and seeing how they do early on this week. And I'll go more in depth about the 2 specific matchups, Gonzaga and Georgia, and then also St. Mary's and Vanderbilt. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and follow along on social media at PostByZach, at unofficial WCC pod. The tournament is here. Fill out those brackets. We will be back to preview the game Gonzaga and Georgia in the next episode, and then that will follow up with St. Mary's and Vanderbilt in the next. All right, that'll do it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.